This video is probably going to be a departure from my usual topics, but I dedicated some 10k plus hours of my life to League of Legends, so might as well get a YouTube video out of it at least. I haven't played League since, like, Smolder came out, so if any of this is outdated, it's Riot's fault. I want to talk about the two champions, Yasuo and Yone. I honestly don't know how to pronounce that character's name. Maybe it's Yone, whatever. I don't respect them. Specifically, I wanted to talk about them through the lens of what their design says about the direction that League took over time. The changes in design and philosophy between the two are part of the reason why I personally decided to stop playing, but that's not what this video is about. Maybe another time. First, there was only one Wind Swordsman. I had already been playing League for a while by the time Yasuo came out, and I won't lie, I played a lot of him on release when his numbers were super overtuned. Double crit, infinite dashes, blocks all projectiles? Riot really outdid themselves with this one. There were many complaints about this character. League was a very different game back then. Not every champion had dashes, lifesteal, resets, and all the other etc. Yasuo was a really fun champion. It was always annoying to me how he could use your minions against you, but there are plenty of champs that do that. Maybe it's me grandfathering him in, but I think that despite how silly he was at release, Yasuo added something unique to League of Legends. He's one of League's signature champions for a reason. And then there were two. I was much less excited when Yone came out many years later. I could see the writing on the wall long before he actually came out. It didn't really start in 2020, I'd say, but around that time, Riot really decided that they did not care about how the community would receive champions. They were running out of design space, so they just started stacking everything up on top of each other and calling it new. They did an April Fool's joke a long time ago where they said Yasuo is getting an update, so his wind wall now appeared all around him. In 2020, they gave AoE wind wall that did damage to a ranged ADC. Yeah, that about sums up my thoughts. Jokes becoming reality aside, I think it's time to get into the meat and potatoes of the video. There are actually a lot of interesting restrictions that Yasuo has to his play pattern that I think keep him from being overbearing most of the time. Let's run down the list of abilities for Yasuo and talk about the play pattern. For his passive, there's not a lot to say. Good old crit chance. The shielding has some powerful use cases in preventing burst and chip damage. It generally takes a little while for him to recharge, so you have windows where you can auto-attack him, or use some kind of reliable poke ability. Let the shield proc, then dump your damage onto him a moment later when it drops. Yasuo purposefully has pitiful base stats because his shield is a lot of what's supposed to keep him in the game. For his Q, he gets a harass ability on his third Q specifically, but he usually can't follow up on it all on his own without either something else to dash through like minions, or by committing his ultimate to the fight. This heavily limits when he can reliably all-in. Wind Wall is mostly unique to Yasuo, so there's not much to compare between the two. It is worth noting the very long cooldown it has, and with how it's basically the only ability that benefits from ability haste, the uptime isn't going to get patched up with items in the more optimal builds. For his E, he gets some pretty high mobility, but again, it's conditional. Sure, he can spam it, but it requires enemy units. Not only that, but the dash is a set distance and speed. Sure, it scales with his movement speed, but his movement speed typically isn't going to be high enough to make it anything insane. This usually gives his enemies time to prepare for the second or third time he dashes through something to get on top of them. Not only that, Yasuo will often need to move between dashes in order to get to the optimal angle to continue a chase. Technically, it can be used to go through walls, but I'd wager a guess to say about as many people dash over walls accidentally as they do on purpose. It requires a lot of situational awareness, and sometimes even patience, to optimally use Yasuo's dash. For his R, he gets a method to all-in people from a significantly longer range. He also gets more survivability because it resets his shield passive. Something that is nice about Yasuo ult is that it requires him to land something else in order to use it. Something else to note, Yasuo loses all stacks of his Q when he ults, mitigating the possibility of CC chains when used in tandem with a teammate's knockup. The Q itself already has some boxes you need to check to use it. Landing 3 skill shots isn't always an easy thing to do, especially without minions around. This means that more often than not, Yasuo won't actually be doing the big ult plays using his own tornado, preferring to rely on more consistent knockups from allies like Malphite or Gragas to get his ults off. With Yasuo, a pattern emerges. When Yasuo plays his cards right, he is rewarded. Maintaining your shield passive, not using your dash too early, or risk losing your primary gap-closing escape tool. These are things that give the Yasuo players pause before flying into the middle of the action. It requires setup, and while he sets up, it gives enemies an opportunity to respond. Can't reliably CC chain you all on his own without having to rely on a somewhat unreliable knockup Q or some other teammate. All of these details are important to keep the Yasuo player from rolling over enemies unable to fight back against the endless onslaught of dashes, knockups, and DPS. Yone, unfortunately, removes most of these checks. Yone Q3 is itself a dash. As a melee character, you usually want to be in melee range, so this is almost a direct upgrade. This massively increases the amount of time Yone actually spends up in your face. And because this is an AoE CC gap closer that does respectable damage, Yone doesn't even need his other abilities in order to keep up the aggression. It also gives Yone a somewhat reliable way to escape fights, even over walls, potentially even CCing people on his way out. It's also worth noting some of the more subtle differences between Yasuo and Yone Q. Yone Q is about 10% less wide than Yasuo's tornado, and has about 10% less range. But the projectile speed is a whopping 25% faster. This means, in practice, that the ability is more difficult to dodge, despite its smaller hitbox. This strips away multiple layers of counterplay that Yasuo had. Yone W is kind of what Yasuo's second passive does, except it's active and it does damage. Yasuo's shield is bigger at a baseline, but he can't decide when to use it. However, Yone's shield is much bigger during teamfights when he hits multiple champions with it, and with much more uptime as the game progresses, this strips away another layer of counterplay. Yone E is a dash, can go over walls, it's a movement speed buff, it is a significant amplifier to his damage, it is also a pseudo cleanse, allowing him to absorb CC without much consequence. It also brings him back to his initial cast position, which, while it can be a drawback, is much more frequently beneficial, allowing him to get in, kill his target, and then get out scot-free. This is how you expect an assassin to play, but with a direct comparison to his 2013 brother, the new hotness is starting to make Yasuo look like a crippled old man. You could probably remove an entire feature from this ability, and it would still dash circles around most other abilities in League of Legends, let alone a champion with as much power as Yasuo. Yone R is a direct upgrade to Yasuo R in most significant ways. It can be used to engage. It can be used to escape. It doesn't require characters to be knocked up in order to use. It does mixed damage. Its hitbox is absolutely enormous. Also, it doesn't get rid of his Q stacks, so if he had Q3 ready after he ults, he can feel free to AoE CC your entire team to his heart's content. Individually, not every single change made between Yasuo and Yasuo 2 is a bad thing. It is, however, when you see the play pattern that emerges as a result of all of these removed checks. Yasuo has 2 mobility tools, both with some pretty heavy restrictions. Only one of them can even be used to disengage, and even then, when you're running away, you're much more likely to encounter friendly units, so that is typically less reliable. Yone has 3 mobility tools with practically no restrictions. All of them can be used to engage or disengage, though it is pretty funny to watch a Yone try and E away from you, only to delay his doom. Yone is a power-crept version of Yasuo in almost every way, and he's easier to play. The only thing that Yasuo has that sets him apart is Wind Wall. Personally, I don't think that Wind Wall is doing enough heavy lifting to make up for all of the advantages Yone has over his counterpart. Not even close. Yone does more damage, more reliably, with more mobility. They power-crept Yasuo, and this disgusts me. The reason why you could justify the absolutely insane DPS that Yasuo put out was because he was so hard to play, because his abilities required setup, and because they give enemies time to respond. Yone will actually teleport behind you in the middle of your whole team in the blink of an eye, go nothing personnel kid, kill you instantly, then teleport away. If the only reliable answer to how you counter a champion is bad early game or CC and burst, then that's not really the kind of game I'm interested in playing. The new Yasuo 2.0 had 3 dash abilities. His shield was a lot spammier and did percent HP damage because of course. He did mixed damage instead of physical. I knew I didn't like him, but I didn't really fully understand how much until he was released. The items at the time created the perfect storm for Yone to be a smash hit on the Rift. You guys remember Death's Dance? Ravenous Hunter? Ah, those were the days. Bad days. I hope this enlightened you on some of the mechanics behind why Yone is fundamentally so much better than Yasuo. I'm sure you can point to specific patches where this might not be the case, but overall, Yone is going to be better. His supreme target access combined with all of the qualities that made Yasuo good without all the drawbacks makes for some immensely frustrating gameplay. It also makes me think that the champion designers just don't really understand the kinds of checks and balances that exist in order to make a champion fun to play against. Or worse yet, they don't care. Either way, it makes me sad to see a game I like get progressively worse with nearly every patch. Yasuo and Yone is just a clear example of a shift in design philosophy, since there was the full intention to make a champion that was just like Yasuo, with text literally copied and pasted between the two champs, with like the passive and Q1. They just applied the 2020 template to make it busted as all hell and unfun to play against. Just like Yuumi, Aphelios, and Set that came before, and just like Samira, Seraphine, and Gwen after. What busted modern champion is your guilty pleasure? Set is mine. I also played Yuumi before she got gutted. Man, Riot has no idea what to do with that champion. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to hear about a specific topic, leave a comment and I'll try to include it in a future video. Subscribe if you want to see it. I love talking about game design in general, but tabletop RPGs are my favorite. I have links for my Twitter, Discord server, and the OneNote document I've been writing my own TTRPG in the comments below. It's called Knickknacks, and it's most similar to Pathfinder 1st Edition. I'm working on a website right now where you can see it in all of its glory. When I'm done, I'll post that link in this video too. I regularly post some of my favorite and latest stuff on both my Discord server and my Twitter. But until then, farewell, fellow gamers.